Howdy folks, my name's Philip, this is Turtle Studios, and we are back here with the Stritch Strat. This is actually the SST S10, but Stritch Strat is a whole lot more fun to say, so we're going to keep going with that. This guitar is all set up, playing nicely and ready to go. I tried to actually film that whole process live, and my GoPro kept overheating and dying, so I have a bunch of disjointed footage. So I'm going to kind of go over what I did and cut in some B-roll the best I can to go over it. So the first thing I did was, of course, take off the old strings. This is a super easy and super straightforward upgrade you can do to pretty much any guitar, especially these cheaper guitars. You don't really know how long they've been sitting in a box or a warehouse, so you don't really know how old the strings are. Any decent quality set of strings is going to improve the playability, the sound, the feel right away. So that's a super easy thing to do. And plus, once you have the strings off, it's going to make a lot of the other things we're going to do for the setup much easier. After I had the strings off, I actually took the back plate off of this guitar. Now, this usually isn't required when you're replacing strings, but it is helpful for this one particularly because it has these 6 small holes. When you're fishing the strings out of these holes, it can be a little annoying, so taking the back plate off definitely makes that process a lot easier. I also made some adjustments to the tremolo cavity back here, specifically the claw and the springs, the tension. I set up the trem to be floating, so we had to have this off anyways. So when I was taking the strings off of this guitar, I had an issue I've seen in other cheaper guitars and even guitars like Squier, where the strings were actually a little bit stuck in the trem block. I don't know what it is, something about the softness of the tremolo block they're using or the temperature changes the guitar is going through potentially. It just causes the ball end to kind of get wedged in there. You can usually pretty easily alleviate this by just taking the smallest Allen key that came with your guitar and just kind of jimmying it around in the holes where the strings come through, which is exactly what I did, and it popped all the strings out with not too much issue. Once that was all said and done, I focused on the bridge of the guitar and I made a couple different adjustments here. The first thing I did was unscrew these 6 screws that hold the tremolo bridge to the body of the guitar. This is a little bit of a counterintuitive adjustment because you might think these need to be screwed all the way down as tightly as possible. But if you think about it, the tremolo has to be able to pivot, so if the screws are all the way down, it's going to make it hard for it to move at all. I backed each of these off about, I don't know, a thread or 2, just to make room for the tremolo to move, and you can actually see this working as you use the tremolo if you look down. Once that was done, I made sort of an intonation template adjustment where I kind of matched the saddles to a pattern I see on a lot of different guitars. Most 6 saddle style trims I've used at least kind of follow this general intonation pattern. So usually once I have the strings off, I quickly sort of set them to this pattern. That way when I have the strings back on the guitar, it's usually pretty fine-tuned to get the intonation there. When you adjust these saddles, which you do by adjusting the 6 screws on the back of the tremolo here, by screwing them back, you're effectively making the length of the string longer, and by moving them forward, you're making the length of the string shorter. When you make the length of the string shorter, the notes you play up and down the fretboard are going to be sharper, and when they're longer, they're going to be flatter. And so once your string is up to pitch, you just check notes up and down the fretboard and see how in tune they are and adjust your saddles accordingly. Another thing I did in this area was adjust the saddles to match the fretboard radius. If you look at your fretboard, it's usually not totally flat, and the saddles on your guitar need to match this radius. There are specific tools you can use to get this super exact, but honestly you can just eyeball this too. You make this adjustment using the 2 little screws on each saddle and the smallest Allen key that came with your guitar. I like to make full use of both screws and give the saddles a nice arch, and so at that point we were done with pretty much all the adjustments we needed to do to the bridge. The last thing I did here was put some Teflon tape on the tremolo arm itself. With these thread-in style tremolo bridges, it can end up feeling a little bit wobbly, and Teflon tape is a super easy thing you can do to fix this. It's something you probably have around the house, and it's not going to damage anything. So I was all done with all the adjustments to the bridge. While I had the strings off and I was in this area, I popped the 3 control knobs off the guitar using a spanner wrench. If you don't have a spanner wrench, you can usually get something like a thin cloth or bandana and pop the knobs off. Just as long as you're pulling up evenly, you're not going to hurt anything. And then I got all the plastic off the pick guard. If I was being super thorough about this, I would have taken the nuts off of the potentiometers, but I was a little bit lazy here, to be honest with you. Next, I focused on the neck of the guitar and the frets. I cleaned up the nut itself, As I mentioned in the unboxing and first impressions of this, it was a little bit messy. It just had some plastic bits from manufacturing, so I used some super fine files that I have specifically for this purpose to clean that up. If you don't have files this small, you can honestly just use the strings you cut off your guitar previously. You're really not trying to take away material here, just clean up the slots and give your strings a nice smooth surface to sit in. When that was all said and done and cleaned up, I used a super thin mechanical pencil and just got some graphite in those nut slots. As you play the guitar, fret notes, use the tremolo, the strings are actually going to move up and down in those nut slots slightly, so putting some graphite in there is just going to give it a little bit of lubrication and something to move on and help improve your tuning stability. So the next thing I did was focus on the frets of this guitar, and I used some steel wool to polish these up. This is something you probably have around your house and something a lot of big guitar manufacturers actually use to polish their frets, so it's perfectly safe for you to use. Before I did that though, I put some tape over the pole pieces on the pickups. Because you're using steel wool, it's going to make little micro bits of metal. The pole pieces are magnetic, so this is just going to save you some cleanup and some headache. I used some fret guards to protect the fretboard on this guitar. You definitely want to do this if you had like a glossy maple neck. I wasn't too worried because this fretboard was kind of rough out of the box anyway. It needed hydration, but you could do this just with masking tape as well if you don't have guards. I will mention the steel wool I used was something I just got out of my kitchen, and it had a polish embedded in the steel wool. It made a little bit of a mess and just was a little bit extra to clean up, so I definitely recommend using just plain steel wool if you have it. But I got that all done. The frets look nice and shiny now, and once that was finished, I used a guitar lemon oil to hydrate this fretboard. Because this is an open pore rosewood-esque material, if you have a maple board or a finish board, you don't want to use this and can just use a guitar polish to clean this off. So I rubbed that in with just an old rag I have, and then I cleaned off the rest of the guitar with a microfiber cloth and a guitar polish. So everything was all clean and said and done for setups on this guitar, and so the next thing to be done was to put new strings on it. Now there's a ton of debate online about the correct way to string guitars and lock the strings. I don't do anything fancy. I've just found if you use enough winds, the tension holds the strings in just fine. In my 15 years of playing guitar and just having a decent amount of guitars in general, I've always strung them this way and never had any issues, so I've never really had any reason to try a different method. One thing I did after I got the strings on was go up and down the neck of the guitar and just gently press on them in between your thumb and index fingers. You're not trying to like really bend the strings, you're just stretching them out slightly. That'll just kind of reduce the amount of times you have to tune up the guitar after you get new strings on it. And once strings were on and there was some tension on the guitar, I used that moment to back the screws out of the body that hold the trem claw into the body of the guitar. This gives the springs a little bit more relief and sets up the bridge to be what we call floating, basically meaning you can bend the pitch of the strings down or up slightly. There's no real exact amount you adjust this. It depends on the gauge of strings you're using, the tuning you're in. So you just kind of back them out slowly, retune, and then get the tremolo where you kind of want it. So yeah, that's everything I did to get this guitar nice and playable. So let's get it plugged in, see how it sounds and how it plays.